In Peru, social movements mobilized to reject the motion for the impeachment of President Pedro Castillo presented by opposition sectors to Congress. The Bolivian government and the Association of Victims of the Sencata and Sacaba massacres signed new agreements for reparations and justice. South African lawmakers rejected a bill to change the constitution on Tuesday, which would have allowed for land expropriations to redress past injustices. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. In Peru, the parliamentary session to study the motion for the president's impeachment is advancing, and social movements are mobilizing to reject the request made by opposition Congress members. The Front for Democracy and Governability called a march to demonstrate against the motion that seeks to oust President Pedro Castillo from power. The protest takes place while the Congress evaluates whether or not to admit the presidential vacancy motion presented by Patricia Chirinos, third vice president of the Congress, which secured the support of a sector of the right-wing opposition. This is the second attempt by right-wing sectors to impeach Castillo. The president held talks with the leaders of several parties on Monday in a bid to promote dialogue and political stability. And the head of the Peruvian Congress, Maria del Carmen Alba, acknowledged on Monday the lack of clear support for the motion to impeach President Pedro Castillo, noting she did not believe it would secure the necessary votes to be debated. In a televised interview, Alba said that not even the 52 votes by 3 right-wing minority benches needed for the motion to be presented to Congress would definitely be secured in Tuesday's plenary session. The Congress president from the Conservative Popular Action Party had declared in September that the population was calling for impeachment. However, she's since distanced herself from that position. In the event that the motion is approved, the debate will begin next week.
I don't vote, I direct, and I don't give my opinion on the matter either. And I don't believe that the 130 members of Congress have a desire to vacate the president. I believe that what is needed is transparency, communication, and to work for governability and to keep a cool head at this moment. Just to finish, José Luis Arriaga, the leader of Renovation Popular, who is one of those pushing for vacancy, talks about removing Pedro Castillo and the vice president. And in that scenario, it would correspond to us to assume the reins of the country. Well, these are assumptions. We are only going to admit the vacancy tomorrow morning. We are not even sure about those 52 votes, so we will wait and see what happens tomorrow.
And as the Peruvian Congress debates whether to begin impeachment proceedings against President Pedro Castillo, let's take a look at what people who gathered against the move had to say a little earlier in the day with our correspondent Veronica Insausti.
Good afternoon. I'm right now in front of the Republic's Congress venue, where several people have arrived, representatives of social movements and organizations and trade unions, to protest against the motion of censorship that is being presented at this moment at the Congress venue while we stand here. Let's talk to some of them, to some of these people who have arrived since very early. Good afternoon, how are you?
Yes, my name is Jessica Galvez. I am here to support Professor Pedro Castillo.
Why are you here?
We are here to stand and support Pedro Castillo, and we want to shut down the Congress, this corrupt Congress.
Hello, sir. What's your name? Why are you here, and what is your name, please?
Well, I am here in my condition of citizen of Rondero. I am present to defend our President Pedro Castillo from the process of vacancy, because it was the Peruvian people who chose him, and it was not the caviar's choice. Not the corruption has to choose. Here the people from Peru are the one who choose, and we have to defend our President of the Republic, who is a Rondero just like me, a peasant just like me. Let's defeat the corruption that has a disease in Peru.
Well, here at this moment at the Congress, in front of us, the debate is taking place. 52 votes from the 130 Congress people are needed to pass the motion, and also later the President of the Republic will be invited to give explanations. This might take 3 to 10 days. And after that, if they reach the 52 votes, the President should present himself to report himself in front of them. or his official lawyer on his behalf. And after that, they will pass to present a presidential vacancy, for which 87 votes are required to complete the motion to the vacancy. This is the information. Let's go back to the studio.
Chile's Congress approved a long-awaited bill to legalize same-sex marriage on Tuesday, joining just a handful of countries in Latin America. The law will also enable married same-sex couples to adopt children. The bill received the green light from the upper house on Tuesday and was immediately given to Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Uruguay and Argentina, and in 14 of Mexico's 32 states up until now. The country has been eagerly awaiting the legalization of same-sex marriage since former President Michelle Bachelet sent a bill to Congress in 2017. The Colombian Parliament has voted in favour of an article which represents the censoring of the press. With 73 votes in favour and 51 against, Article 68 was approved, establishing that anyone who denounces public officials or former public officials could go to prison. The article, added at the last minute in the plenary session of the Senate, established that whoever attempts to attack a public official or former public official by denouncing false facts about him or her family may be sentenced to 60 to 120 months in prison and a fine of up to 13,000 times the minimum wage. The article was described by several Congress members as fraudulent, and media organizations and activists in defense of press freedom have strongly rejected the proposal, warning it endangers the free press and democratic rights in Colombia.
This article is not related to that purpose. It also creates important risks for freedom of speech and opens the door to the liability of legal prisons, which does not exist in Colombia.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The government of Bolivia and Association of Victims of the Sencata and Sacaba massacres signed new agreements for reparations and justice. Among the key points of the agreements are the creation of a trust fund with the objective of guaranteeing access to work and the incorporation of almost 8 million Bolivians into the national productive process, as well as the extension of scholarship programs. Similarly, it was agreed to extend the validity of food vouchers for another year, in addition to ensuring the most optimal and timely healthcare for all survivors of these massacres. Both parties committed themselves to renewing the agreement every month until the established agenda is exhausted.
Scholarships have already been granted in the previous administration, and now we are going to resume these studies grants again to benefit all those affected by these events. We have also seen the need to extend the food voucher system granted by the CDN. This was initially provided for 1 year and will be extended for another year. Finally, among the most relevant issues, the health sector has to continue with the individualized care for the cases that still require attention from the state.
The government of Bolivia revealed that the de facto regime of Janine Áñez had requested a supply of arms from foreign powers a few weeks before the victory of Luis Arce in the elections that re-established democracy in a South American country. The request was made to authorities and suppliers in the United States and the United Kingdom. The request for supplies was made at a time when a second coup was being plotted, with the participation of foreign mercenaries, renegade police squads and mobs of vigilantes seeking to prevent, even by assassination, Luis Arce from assuming the presidency.
We would also like to mention they have made a request for equipment and arms to the American and British embassies 3 weeks before the general election in 2020.
President-elect of Honduras, Xiomara Castro, secured the most votes in the country's electoral history in the November 28th general elections. According to the latest update from the National Electoral Council, the leader of the Liberty and Refoundation Party secured 1.4 million votes, which represented 50.63% compared to the 35.89% of the vote for Nasri Esrura from the ruling National Party. No other Honduran president elected since 1981 has surpassed 1.2 million ballots. Meanwhile, it was reported that the Public Prosecution Office is guarding the facilities of the National Electoral Council, where all electoral materials are processed, in case of any violent incidents that may arise, as some sectors seek to ignore the results. The electoral body also reiterated that the elections went smoothly and in accordance with the law.
Xiomara is the person with the most votes that Honduras had ever had, and I'm really pleased, and the fact that she is the first woman says a lot about that.
Cuba is on alert due to the resumption of tourist activities on the island and the appearance of Omicron, the new variant of COVID-19, which the World Health Organization authorities have classified as a cause for concern. No cases of Omicron have been reported on the island so far. Health authorities report that Delta is still the most widely detected variant in the world. Omicron is the fifth variant of the coronavirus and still generates a lot of uncertainty. Scientists are investigating its characteristics, especially its level of transmissibility and its virulence. Cuban authorities are expanding testing to ensure the prompt detection of cases in a country that has seen a substantial fall in the number of active cases for almost 11 weeks.
Among the measures that were established was to resume PCR sampling here at the airport. Firstly, aimed to travelers coming from 7 countries that had already reported the presence of Omicron, including South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, Swaziland. Secondly, Cuba is reinforcing epidemiological surveillance in the airport, thus reinforcing the presence of surveillance on all the crew once they arrive, which is the first line of surveillance. Then also reinforcing in this position where we are today, which is the second line of surveillance and the third line of surveillance, which is after customs.
Argentina confirmed its first case of the Omicron variant of coronavirus in a traveller from South Africa on Sunday. The health ministry informed that the 38-year-old patient has been in isolation since his arrival and underwent a PCR test before and after arriving in the country, which was negative in both cases.
The truth is that it worries me a lot because we have already experienced the issue of COVID, of being locked up and everything. And the truth is that this situation is very complicated. But let's hope that it won't be like the one that left, the variant.
It doesn't seem to have too much importance or danger, so the truth is that I'm not worried at all. Plus I'm vaccinated and I've had both doses. A lot of times the media spreads fear too much, and that scares people. So it seems to me that first you have to base yourself on the scientific evidence and then take the necessary precautions.
Now we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. South African lawmakers rejected a bill to change the constitution on Tuesday, which would have allowed for land expropriations to redress past injustices. The proposed law failed to garner the required two-thirds majority in the 400-seat parliament, with 204 lawmakers voting in favour and 145 against. Black South Africans were dispossessed of their land during 3 centuries of colonialism and apartheid, which officially ended in 1994. According to data provided by President Cyril Ramaphosa, whites, who make up 8% of the population, possess 72% of farmland in the country. Less than 10% is in the hands of black people, who make up 4/5 of the population. For the past 4 years, a multi-party committee has been working on the proposed changes, which would have allowed the state to take farmland from private owners and redistribute it to landless blacks.
There were no abstentions. 145 members voted against, and 204 members voted in support of the bill. As the required majority has not been obtained, in terms of Section 74, subsection 2 of the Constitution, the bill will not be read a second time.
Russian President Vladimir Putin and his United States counterpart Joe Biden held a virtual summit on Tuesday as tensions mount over the military build-up in Ukraine. The behind-closed-doors talks came after weeks of rising tensions between Moscow and Washington as Ukraine deployed thousands of troops to the border region with Russia, while the United States leads a Western propaganda campaign drumming up fears of a Russian invasion. Russia has denied the accusations of military posturing as hysteria and maintained it's responding to a Ukrainian build-up and North Atlantic Treaty Organization provocations. Ahead of the talks, US officials said that Washington was prepared to impose its toughest economic sanctions yet on Moscow, if necessary, targeting the biggest banks in Russia and making it nearly impossible for them to convert rubles into dollars. United Nations officials pledged to find a way to unfreeze Afghanistan's state assets and remove sanctions, despite concerns over the Taliban government. The United Nations Special Envoy on Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, warned that about 97% of the country's population may sink below the poverty line unless the political and economic crises are addressed. The UN official assured Afghan Deputy Foreign Minister Sher Mohammed Abbas that the organisation is making efforts to unfreeze the country's assets abroad to prevent a total breakdown of the economy and social order. Afghanistan is facing a storm of crises, including a plunging currency, a sharp rise in prices for food and fuel, and a lack of cash at private banks after 20 years of foreign intervention and war. Authorities do not have the funds to pay salaries and other essential expenses. Syria's military confirmed on Tuesday that Israeli fighter jets fired missiles on the Syrian port of Latakia, damaging containers but without inflicting casualties. Officials said several missiles struck the container area in the port, setting some of them on fire. Latakia is Syria's main commercial port, through which food and other important supplies flow into the country. Israel has frequently targeted what it describes as Iranian interests in the nation. Some of the strikes in the past have targeted the main airport in the capital, Damascus. The latest attack on Latakia was described as highly irresponsible. The Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen continues to bomb the country, which is suffering the world's biggest humanitarian crisis with no end to the conflict in sight. The violence has escalated dramatically over the last few months, despite efforts by the United Nations to engineer a ceasefire in the 7-year-old war that has taken a heavy humanitarian toll. A statement from the Saudi coalition claimed it had conducted precision strikes on legitimate military targets in the city of Sana'a and in the last 24 hours also struck Houthi targets in Marib and Juf. A Houthi military spokesman said earlier that the group fired several ballistic missiles and used 25 armed drones in attacks on Saudi targets, including an Aramco oil facility in Jeddah and the defense ministry in the capital, Riyadh. There were no reports of casualties or significant damage from the strikes. The war has killed tens of thousands, predominantly civilians, and pushed Yemen to the brink of famine. The death toll from the eruption of Indonesia's Mount Semeru volcano rose to 34 on Tuesday. The biggest mountain on the island of Java ejected a mushroom of volcanic ash into the sky on Saturday and rained hot mud as thousands of people fled their homes. According to the National Disaster Agency, 17 people remain missing. Rescuers have been battling dangerous conditions since the deadly weekend eruption, searching for survivors and bodies in the volcanic debris. Officials have advised locals not to travel within 5 kilometers of Semeru's crater, as the nearby air is highly polluted and could affect vulnerable groups. Indonesia sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, where the meeting of continental plates causes high volcanic and seismic activity. And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.